Welcome back to Web Nostalgia, and today we're back looking into Skins UK, the show about different generations of teens growing up in Bristol from the year 2007 all the way to 2013. Today we are on our second part of the series and we say goodbye to this Generation 1 in their second season. If you have not yet watched our first part talking about Series 1, please do, it would mean a lot. We are also once again joined by Shadow VA, who will be covering our gaming content every of the 25th of the month, since he has been watching the show along with us. Anyway, let's start with the episode 1. Like season 1, these episodes overall mainly focus on certain characters per episode. In this episode we focus on Tony and Maxie since both their stories are linked in really well done, in a way. We found out in this episode after Tony's cliffhanger of being hit by a bus that Tony is physically and mentally changed after suffering from hematomia. He has mostly lost his weight and confidence that he had in season 1 from losing his memories. We even see this when he talks to Maxie's mum saying he's stupid now, and even when he's on the bus with Maxie, he holds his hand after a bus drives past. We also discover Tony can't go back to college unless he writes his own name, resulting in him scribbling on a piece of paper and freaking out as Maxie dances at a different location. Going back to Maxie, we see that he's in a dancing trio, which is how we open the episode. We then see Maxie takes care of Tony, since he is now out of hospital, and look after him by asking Tony how their moves were, resulting in him not understanding, and Maxie tells him it's okay. After all of this, we then see how Maxie's estate is like, as they both walk to his house, with them even meeting these young chavvy girls saying that they're both fit but Maxie is gay and Tony is mental. We are then introduced to Maxie's parents named Jackie and Walter, along with his dog Taz. We then find out when Maxie talks to Walter that he's a part-time dancer with his dog, and he doesn't allow Maxie to drop out of school to become a dancer, saying he's going to be a builder like him, while having spare hours to do dancing. We also see in the scene that yes, his parents have accepted he is gay, but Maxie still suffers from homophobia in his estate from Chav's winding him up. However, later it turns out one of his bullies, Dale, is in fact gay after tackling Maxie at a rave, and they both end up shagging. Anyway, going back to Tony, we then see that he's brought back home by Chris, Jal and Anwar, while his only friends that actually see him a lot after his accident, other than Maxie, and then we then see how worried his father gets in his home life. This all comes from the guilt from being addicted to Tony in the first season, which we then found out from his worrying to Maxie's dad, as Tony sneaks out with Effie to go to the same rave, where Tony has a lot of trauma from crowds, loud music, interacting with Sid and Michelle, and well, this all results in him getting lost and upset, ending up at Maxie's front door. The episode then ends as Maxie finds Tony, getting him back home, and well, Walter, after reflecting, works out with Maxie that he'll carry on with school, but he doesn't mind whether he joins him as a builder or not. Eventually, our episode then ends with Tony being visited by Maxie at his house, as Maxie then helps him to start writing again, explain like it's his moves from the start of the episode, with Tony writing his full name, which allows him to go back to school. End the episode on such a sweet note.
Episode 2 starts out by introducing the mysterious photographer, which sets the scene out for the episode. The stalker is seen with photos of Maxie, with his schedule out on the table as well, in a planner. This sheds more light on the situation. The stalker is caring for her seemingly disabled mother, who she tells that Maxie is her boyfriend, which leaves the viewer wanting to know more. It's a very good technique that the writers used, cut to the play, with both of them singing a musical. Little do we know, it's the stalker's imagining of the scenario. The stalker is watching Maxie and Michelle perform whilst they're kissing. The drama teacher is very picky and has a go at all of them, stating that their performance was subpar. He then kisses Michelle in a very creepy display to make a point of how it should be acted out. This is a little creepy, as I said before, and it will be a major plot point in the episode. Then, a light falls, missing Michelle by inches, from the stalker, who appears to want rid of Michelle out of the picture out of sheer jealousy. This portrays a twisted mind of a stalker, as a person without these issues would understand that it's acting. Maxie finds a gift in his locker and notices a flyer for the fancy dress party. Maxie is still concerned about the stalker and Anwar teases him about it. Michelle confronts Tony at the party, who is seen with Abby, who has also dressed as Princess Leia with Tony as Luke. This scene really does show the difference between the two, but also the similarities. The drama teacher is then seen trying to write some more of a script, who Sketch, the stalker, tries to bargain with to become the lead cast so that she can kiss Maxie and have a chance with him. He tells her that she's not beautiful enough to be a believable character. Anwar and Maxie are seen looking through the drama teacher's drawers, find condoms, and come up with a strategy to get Anwar laid. Michelle dances with the drama teacher to try and make Tony jealous, who really pays no mind to it. Then Anwar and Maxie go up to Sketch. But it turns out that Sketch's dreams might come true after all. But as it turns out, Maxie wants to get Owl laid. So Sketch politely declines, she's very confused about this, and goes off to drink alone. Whilst Michelle tries to get Tony to remember, who doesn't feel anything sexual towards Michelle and has erectile dysfunction. Sketch lies on Maxie's bed. He then comes home, with Sketch lying under his bed for the remainder of the night. She did befriend Michelle, talking about the pain of losing someone you love the previous night, and seems to be a friend, or at least an acquaintance, and is seen talking with her the next day. Because of what Sketch saw the drama teacher doing, she has an idea to get him out of the way, which is to accuse him of sexual assault, as you do, which the teachers and students believe because of his nature. He gets fired, and then sets the plot fully into motion. There are rumours of what the trauma teacher had done, with some added flair sprinkled in by Anwar, with Michelle comforting Sketch of what she supposedly went through. Maxie then confronts Sketch at her house, with her mother confused and tells her that they're not going out, which makes her mother phone up the school to shed light on the false accusations. Sketch then ties her up and cuts to Michelle, practicing for the big night ahead. Today's the day where Michelle is nervous, and Sketch gives her some of her mum's pain medication, and gives her over the recommended dosage in order to poison her. Michelle is seen being sick, and the show is about to be cancelled before Sketch shows up and says that she knows all the lines, and that she'd been helping Michelle practice when the play starts. It goes on for a little bit, with Maxie doing some solo stuff, and then Sketch appears as a female lead, which confuses the absolute hell out of Maxie. He plays along until the kiss, where he asks what she did with Michelle. Disgusted, he tells her that he felt nothing, that she's disgusting. Whilst Tony tells Michelle that he remembers loving her, the episode ends with Sketch storming out, causing a scene and visiting Anwar to have sex with him.
Episode 3 overall focuses on my favourite character in the show by how relatable he is to me, especially from this episode, and that is Sid. In this episode, Sid is in despair. His best friend Tony is now a shadow of his old self, and his girlfriend Cassie is now settled down in Scotland, but he thinks she is cheating on him. We then find out more about Sid's dad and his family in this episode, as when Sid's overbearing grandfather, unpleasant uncle and cousins visit, with even Liz, Sid's mum, returns to the house pretended to be back with his dad after we found out that they had a one-night stand, resulting in him telling his granddad that she took him back. From all of this, us as an audience with Sid really understand why his dad treated him the way he did in season 1. By the way, his supposed ill grandfather and suck ass uncle treat him. After we then find out his family want to stay over and they get settled in, we then see Sid break up with Cassie over the misunderstanding, and he breaks his laptop, until when Liz's drunk German boyfriend crashes into the house, demanding for her, and the supposed hard uncle also gets knocked out. As well, the German man faints as he lets Sid's dad go, as Liz brings him to hospital, and this ends up with Sid's dad being victimised once again by his family, but this time he finally fights back and kicks them out. After all of this, Sid's dad finally opens up to him and essentially apologises for how he treated him, and he sits there happily as he smokes and drinks. Well, this is until Sid wakes up and finds his father has died from an apparent heart attack on the chair, as he also discovers Cassie has blocked his number. This all becomes too much for Sid as he walks out the house, leaving his dad sitting there in the house, as the wrecked car is also still in the garden. He is then traumatised and he can't speak to anyone at school sitting there. Tony then checks up on him as he carries on sitting in the classroom after school closes. Tony then explains how he's been told how Sid was his best friend and how he also looked after him in hospital and always used to visit him, resulting in Sid finally speaking and saying how bad Tony was, and that it was just too much for him, and that's why he never had the courage to really speak to him in the season. Tony also asks him why he is upset, but he says he can't say it as they both head out. Both the boys then attend a Crystal Castle gig, where Abigail continues to manipulate Tony like he did to her in the first season, and while Sid finally stands up to her for Tony, telling her to piss off. But as the main gig opens up, both the boys get put apart by the crowd, and while Tony finds Sid fading in and out of the music, until when he finally turns around and finally hugs Tony screaming, which overall is my favourite scene as we see Tony in such a mess, but he still forgives Sid and comforts him, as the song Alice Practice matches the movements of Sid very well. Finally, we then end the episode with Sid telling Tony, showing him his dad's dead body in the house, as they both smoke and Tony finally gets him to ring his mum. The episode then ends with Sid on the train to his mum, as we then see Cassie passes in her own train back to Bristol. This episode overall relates to me so much with this type of character. Sid already is, while overall representing loss really well, something else I have gone through. Episode 4 overall focuses on Michelle. At the start of the episode we see Michelle visit Tony once again to ask him how much she remembers, but he still doesn't remember much about their relationship. This then results in her being frustrated and attempts to seduce Tony. However, he develops erectile dysfunction, which angers her, and enraged, she then slaps him, blaming him for his accident and his condition. She then apologises but tells him she cannot wait any longer, and gives up. However, before she leaves, Tony gives her an early birthday present, which makes her invite him to a camping trip, but he declines. After this, we then learn that Michelle's mother had ended her relationship with Malcolm. What? She's now married already to a guy named Ted. The mother and daughter have also moved into his new upscaled home, which Michelle hates. We also discover Ted has a spoiled daughter named Scarlett as well, who moves in suddenly due to an argument with her mother, making Michelle move into a smaller room. Then a day or so later, Scarlett wins over most of the gang from her charm and sex appeal when she joins her at school. She also ends up inviting herself to the planned camping trip as well, due to her having a car, which annoys Michelle even more. Then after cutting to a lovely fart from Sid in the car as they drive to the trip on the day, we then see Michelle feels alone at her own birthday trip by Scarlett being there. We also see Scarlett getting close to Sid, and while later Michelle catches Scarlett trying to manipulate him, and she finally confronts her, resulting in her realised Scarlett isn't that much of a bad person and just pretends to be, similar to Tony in season 1. Michelle then goes after Sid, and he expresses his grief over his father, and the two then kiss and make love with each other on the beach. The two then wake up and agree to be in a private relationship and start to spend a lot of time with each other. This is even shown in the ending scene where Sid then returns home with Michelle and they attempt to have sex. However, Cassie is in Sid's room and catches them. Just to also mention, in this episode we also see more about Maxie and Martin Sketcher's situation. Overall, Maxie finds out that Anwar and Sketch have been shagging on the beach, which results in them arguing on the trip, as Sketch also apologises for her actions, but the rest of the gang are still unsure about her. However, she then sings a song to Scarlett which implies that she still has a thing for Maxie, which is honestly just weird.
Episode 5 starts off with Chris being sat with his bitchy head mistress as she expels him from college, describing him as lazy and that he has not submitted any work this year, and that he is always doing drugs and sex around the school. Shortly after this, he goes to Jal asking for some advice, while she tells him he should try for once, and not say no all the time. And to which he says if that actually happens, she has to say yes to everything, which she obliges to. Later on we see Tony through the eyes of Chris being taught how to swim again by his father. As Chris watches, after this we see that Chris has gone to the office job many times and has been fired many other times. He is then given one final chance by becoming an estate agent and goes to jail, and they both kiss. As I predicted in series 1, they would become a couple. With his power, Chris decides since he can't sell a property that he will squat there in the meanwhile, tricking Jal into thinking he actually got the place for especially working, which isn't true, something that Cassie actually points out to him when she actually moves in with him, and she says that she hates lies and that she wants Jal to know the truth. However, Chris doesn't tell the truth, and then Cassie lies saying that Jal actually wanted to split up with Chris, which was a lie. She was combating a lie with a lie, which shows Cassie's character. Later on we see Chris and Angie meet again as she is looking for another property, and unfortunately for Jal, another chance to get with Chris. Chris ends up throwing a party and him and Angie start having sex. However, he doesn't feel right and says that he loves Jal. Jal then enters and is unaware of what Cassie said, and she sees Angie leave the party. to which they break up. Later on in the morning, the twat of an estate agent comes into the flat that Chris was squatting in, and notices how much of a dump it is. Thanks to this, Chris actually gets fired, and his boss feels sad to let him go. All whilst this is going on, Jal discovers she is pregnant, and Chris invites her round. Not knowing, he tries to get his unrequited love back. Jal doesn't understand, and he basically starts telling her how much she means to him. However, Jal takes offense to this, saying you think everyone else has perfect lives, do you? But after a bit of time, they decide to stay together as Angie leaves town and gives her old house to Chris.
Episode 6 starts with Tony arriving at the party where Sid and Michelle are. Seemingly enjoying being a couple, Cassie aims to spite them, suggesting that her and Tony should be a couple. Tony ends up taking some pills, which make him trip the fuck out, making him remember his old self. Which pisses him off at the fact that Sid is with Michelle, and that he views Michelle as his. He goes up to them and takes Sid's drink whilst being very passive-aggressive towards Sid. Michelle and Sid leave, have sex in the toilets, and are found by Tony, who pulls them aside and tells them that it's wrong, and that Sid loves Cassie, not Michelle. The two leave, with Tony seeing a girl who somehow knows about the incident with Effie in the previous season and taunts him about it. And the only one who knows about what happened really was Tony. The episode ends with not much happening aside from the previous mentions in terms of plot points.
Episode 7 starts off with us finding out that Effie and Tony's father has gone away on a business trip, and thanks to this, Effie has become the parent of the house, as her mother is so depressed that she can't cope and is asleep most of the time. Meanwhile, Tony is starting to come to terms with his personality, and starts to understand the error of his ways, and how he messed up, by pushing all of his friends away before the accident. Later on after this, we see Effie going to her private school, of where she is tasked in having to complete her art coursework, and has to mentor a new girl called Pandora Moon, to which she rejects at first, saying that she has always been alone. They do become good friends, however, and as this is all happening, Sid and Michelle break up, revealing that Sid only did it for a quick fling, and that he never actually stopped loving Cassie. However, when he tells Cassie to not be stupid anymore, she just shows that she's not interested anymore, and that he has hurt her to an extreme where she doesn't want to get back with him. With no results and nowhere to go, Sid enlists the help of Effie to sort it all out, to which she accepts and says that there is one catch, however, and that is that he will have to do her art coursework for her. After all of this and one attempt, Sid finally finishes Effie's artwork and falls asleep, all whilst Effie is buying cannabis and getting someone she didn't want to kiss Cassie instead, to expose what Cassie has actually become. From what Cassie has actually become to Sid. Sid, after all this, wakes up with a horrible sight of another man kissing Cassie, to which he is enraged, and decides to go and confront Cassie, and the two argue. And Sid purely states that why wasn't she there when his father died? And in the midst of this argument, she keeps bringing up Michelle, to which Sid stops and says he's always loved her, and they get back together. Almost the same thing happens. After much tension, Tony finally picks up the phone, and Michelle says she loves him, thus ending the episode. Episode 8 starts off with Jal trying to tell Chris that she is pregnant and is starting to think of having an abortion. Almost as this happening, college starts, and it is revealed that examinations are approaching, and that unfortunately they will no longer be able to get study leave thanks to them all being bad behaved all year round. Jal then goes home and is confronted by her father, who tells her that she needs to think about herself and her music along with her exams, and tells her to help with this she should dump Chris, describing him as useless weight and saying he's just a junkie. In the meanwhile, it is revealed that Chris no longer has the house that Angie left him, and that him and Cassie have instead decided to rent a house, and that he wants Jal to move in with him. In the meanwhile, Michelle is focusing on her Spanish, so not to fail, and in Spanish, whilst this is all going on, Jal says to Michelle that she is in fact pregnant, all in Spanish, to which Michelle doesn't understand and simply gets frustrated that she didn't know the words that Jal had said, leaving her to go walk off with Tony, as the two are trying to fix their relationship to what it once was. Later on after this, we see Jal go home of where her brothers have an announcement, and that is that they are giving up music and are gonna focus on a clothing business, with some very stupid words on t-shirts. Jal feels like she isn't getting enough attention, so breaks the whole news to her father and her brothers, that she is in fact pregnant, and she storms out the room, to which her father says that she best act quickly before she throws everything else away. When all else fails and her father doesn't care, Jal decides to go see her mother, not knowing what to do, but gets told some home truths about kids and is advised not to make the same mistake her mother made, which makes Jal angry as her mother sticks up for her father, advising the same thing about an abortion. Later on in the night, Cassie finds out that Jal is pregnant and suggests that she tells Chris, telling her that lies get nowhere, and acting rather psychotic in order for her to change her mind. A day later, Jal is attending her music lesson and sees Chris advising her not to go. However, she very abruptly says he's worrying for nothing and goes to the audition, to which she is ridiculed by the judges and is suggested to play a little piece so not to fail. She ignores the advice and plays the massive piece and wows the judges, all while storming off. We cut back to the night again of where Jal finds out that Chris is in hospital and goes to tell him she's pregnant before anything bad happens to him. However, when she gets there, she is struck with the ultimate betrayal, with the nurse revealing that she spilled the information to Cassie earlier, stating that she was in fact his girlfriend. Jal is confused and angry, whilst also being told the same thing that Chris's brother died of. While also being told that the same thing that Chris is suffering from is the same thing that Chris's brother died of, and that it was a blood clot. But all whilst this is happening, things get worse, and Chris dies for a few minutes, all whilst Jal is worrying and crying, and that's where the episode ends.
Episode 9 starts out with Chris in recovery, with Cassie and Sid looking after him. Cassie then leaves the house to sit her philosophy exam, leaving Sid to take care of him, which ends up playing out in a really hilarious scene where Sid tries to take his dressing off and he gets a bit beaten up. Cassie's in the exam, but she can't seem to write anything, with her opening up to the examiner about her problems, saying how fucked up her life's been so far. The examiner pays really no mind to this and appears very harsh about her problems, such as anorexia and self-harm, but then says that there's other ways of finding happiness, such as dancing. The two dance, and she eventually writes and completes the entire exam. Cassie gets back and finds Sid cooking for Chris and Michelle. Cassie is absolutely fucking furious and flips at them, has a go at Michelle and Sid, whereas Chris is enjoying the meal and Sid's just trying to be civil. The scene is quite nice though, because it does kind of show how everything isn't okay within the friendship group. Like, sure, Cassie and Sid are back together, but the relationships are still more or less severed between Michelle and Cassie. Cassie then goes to bed, and Sid says that he's never going to leave her again, and then joins her. Cut to the next day, where Cassie leaves the house to get milk, and comes back to see Chris, his mother, who tried to explain that Chris may not recover. Cassie blows this off and attempts to get her to see Chris, who she can't bear to see. This is a very emotional scene, really, because you kind of have a hint about what happens, but it's not complete. And then you feel really awful for Chris, like, especially me as a viewer. I felt really awful because Chris's mother left, and then as soon as he's ill, she comes back and doesn't even see him. Cassie goes back inside to see Chris crying, who she convinces to go and sit down. They watch TV while sharing a joint, and she shows a Monkey Man shirt that he got for him. And Chris loves this. He starts describing that he's really happy with life before then falling ill. He forgets Jal's name, he clutches his head and starts crying. Cassie calls an ambulance, but it's too late. Chris dies in her arms, but not before uttering Jal's name. He did remember. Cassie runs away to go to New York to forget her trouble.
This episode, by the title Final Goodbyes, focuses well on all the characters we have met on the way through this first generation. So let's just get into this long, lovely send-off. The day is here, it's results day for A-levels, and it's also Chris's funeral. The gang have made a pact not to look at their grades until they have finally said goodbye to Chris. However, we see Anwar, despite being told by his mother he can go and work for his dad if he doesn't get into uni, but he still has a peek at his grades and he is ultimately disappointed. Meanwhile, we see Sid is once again in an awkward part of his life, with him now having an odd truce with Tony, as well as being depressed over Chris's death and Cassie's disappearance. We then discover Maxie has now got a boyfriend named James. They both start making the plans to head over to London after the funeral. We also see Michelle is trying everything to comfort Jal, who has not only lost a boyfriend, she also has had an abortion. The two then go to the zoo and Michelle reveals to Jal that they are there because this is where she met Chris when they were younger. They also end up discussing all the other wonderful memories of him, which also originates the famous quote to the show, "Fuck it for Chris," since that was his main phrase. While this happens, Sid discovers an unmarked New York postcard addressed to him, and it gives him a clue to where Cassie is. However, a suited man comes to the door and explains he is Graham Miles, Chris's father, who, yes, is our good friend Jim, but is more serious in this show, and tells Sid he doesn't want them to attend, and he tells Sid that he doesn't want Chris's junkie friends who brought him down at his funeral. Sid then agrees while still being outraged. After Sid talks to Tony about it and they slightly argue, they both then steal Chris's coffin in order to give him a proper goodbye, while being chased by Graham, and they both escape through a really badass scene, which is one of my favourites due to its music, and it starts to make Sid and Tony become better friends. The two then get the coffin to Chris's old flat where Maxie and James are, waiting for the funeral, but then Jal and Michelle return, and they both are furious, saying that they have no respect, with them both quietly returning the coffin again. Then we cut to where we see Sketch arriving at Anwar's house, and once again she tries to manipulate him, saying everyone but him has a talent, by making him reveal he has a plan for everyone but not himself. This then makes her make him think his friends will forget about him, but he still attends the funeral, where we then see the gang and more of Chris's friends looking down at the funeral Chris's dad has made, as the gang say their last goodbyes to their friend. Jal then gives this moving speech that drowns out the priest and overall moves Graham, making him and the rest of the gang in tears.
I've been thinking about what Chris would have wanted me to say today. The advice he'd give me, which would be something like, "You know what, babe? Fuck it. These guys know all about me. Tell them about someone different." So I thought I'd say something about a hero of Chris's. A man called Captain Joe Katinga. In 1960, climbing into a foil balloon, Captain Joe ascended 32 kilometers into the stratosphere. And then, armed only with a parachute, he jumped out. He fell for 4 minutes and 36 seconds, reaching 714 miles per hour before opening his parachute 5 kilometers above the earth.
And set him free from
It had never been done before, and it's never been done since.
All your saints in the eternal
He did it
habitations.
just because he could.
Keep going.
And that's why Chris loved him. Because the thing about Chris was, he said yes.
Father,
He said yes to everything.
Spirit, you live
He loved everyone.
forever and ever. Amen.
He was the bravest man I knew. And that was... He slung himself out of a foil balloon every day. Because he could. Because he was. And that's why... And that's why... We loved him.
Which then is followed by the launch of several pink fireworks which Chris would have loved. After the funeral, main gang then sit down near a bonfire to open their results, which results in Anwar realising everyone has gone their own separate ways and he sneaks out before they can start. We then find out everyone did fairly well, with Tony getting 3 A's and a B, meaning he can go to Cardiff Uni. Sid gets a B and 2 C's, Maxie gets a B and an E. Jal gets 2 A's and a C, showing she can go to a music college. Michelle gets 2 A's and a B, meaning she can go to York Uni. And then they all discover Anwar has went missing, while discovering he only got 2 E's and a U, explaining why he left. As they said, he worked the hardest. We then cut to seeing the miserable Anwar returning home to find Sketch waiting on him, as he tells her she was right, and then she begins to start begging him to work to make their relationship work again, or at least have one day to see how things go. But Anwar says he has to at least say goodbye to his friend Maxie, who has always been there for him, and runs off. Meanwhile, we then see Jal is sitting in front of Chris's grave in the rain as Graham approaches her. They both then have a really well done conversation which makes Graham understand how Jal mostly fixed Chris, and he then apologises for banning the gang from the funeral. We then see Maxie and James are waiting nervously at the bus stop when Anwar finally comes to say goodbye. But on an impulse, Maxie, inspired by Chris, suggests Anwar should come to London, with them planning to go with no money, with even James agreeing. As the bus drives away, saying goodbye to the best friends, we then see Sketch seeing it all happen and is shocked. Come back to Sid, we then see him being dropped off unexpectedly to a Bristol airport. Toddy tells him to not give up on Cassie and gives him a passport with the ticket to New York, telling him he will find her. Outside the airport, we then see another one of my favourite scenes showing Tony and Sid's tearful farewell as they forgive each other for everything, with Tony saying Sid was always his favourite. After Sid sets off and Tony wipes away his tears, him and Michelle drive back to a parking lot and start to consider whether they should carry on going out when they're at uni, with Tony admitting he's not ready to say goodbye to it. With Tony admitting he's not ready for this chapter of his life to close, and the two reflect on their wonderful times together and say it's worth it. Finally, we then see Sid arriving in New York, searching for Cassie from a photo he has of her, and he is then shown standing outside of the cafe where she works at, with her even working there at the window. But there it just leaves us not knowing what happened, as we then cut to Effie in Tony's bed, smiling at the camera, showing she'll be the main role in the next generation of characters.
So overall, that's the end of Gen 1, and what a ride that was. Chris dying, who would have thought? Tony being hit by a truck? I'm telling you now, that was a bit of a mindfuck. And Chris and Jal, Cassie and Sid, and even Anwar and Amy. And even seeing Maxie finally find someone, what a ride it's been. But don't be afraid, because it's not just over yet. Oh no, as Effie suggests, there is just more and more drama. Relationships, heartbreak, and possibly some more Posh Kenneth. Oh, never mind. Rest in peace, you very, very, very brilliant man. So, next we cover Gen 2 of Skins, with a lot more drama and more of Effie. Who would have thought? And as always, thank you for watching. We have been Web Nostalgia. Thank you for reliving the nostalgia, and as always, I've been Gokuja, he's been another Geek123, and I will see you all later, and peace. Have a good one.
Thank you.